Hello, my name is Shona Vertue and welcome to the Overexamined Life. Today I have with me the spectacular Shona Vertue to help provide us with a holistic picture of health. Shona was an elite athlete who competed in gymnastics at the highest level before moving into the personal training space where she worked with various high-profile clients, including David Beckam, to help them better understand their bodies. And her program, the Vertue Method, is practiced by thousands around the world. But to simply call Shona a trainer would be doing her an incredible disservice. What sets Shona apart is a rigorous scientific understanding of not only the physical, but how the physical ties into the mental and spiritual aspects of our lives. This is why when I say a holistic picture of health, I really do mean holistic. So I'm very excited to share this conversation with you. We talked about mental barriers to exercise, the blueprint for all-around health, the unique intimacy of training with someone, social media's impact on body image, Shona's Buddhist journey, and much, much more. But before we get into the interview, I want to talk a little bit about my affiliate partner, the Waking Up app. Waking Up is a meditation app that is not just about relaxing. Although there are sleep meditations, Waking Up is about taking that next step in understanding your mind and how you perceive reality. If you want a long-term solution for conditions such as anxiety or insomnia, if you want to be more present with your loved ones, if you want to completely revolutionize the way you think about the world, then the Waking Up app is worth a try. I'm not just saying that. I have spent over 300 hours with this app and it's changed my life. If you want to start making these changes in your life, head over to the description of this episode and follow the link to get your first 30 days free. All right, here's my chat with Shona Vertue. So Shona, it's so great to have you here. And I first discovered your work through my wife, Izzy, who dragged me kicking and screaming into one of your mobility courses as a chronically immobile man. And I ended up really loving it. And it became this great way for us to bond each morning. And I felt great after every session. But regrettably, I haven't kept up the habit, which is a reflection on me, not you. But I just wanted to say thank you for just providing that experience. It was awesome.
I'm stoked that you got into mobility. It's funny, that is normally how most men find me, is actually through their partners, their wives, just being like, you need to stretch more, so try this.
Yeah, well, we do these like yin yoga classes occasionally, and she'll say, you're not even trying the pose. And I'm like, I'm trying as hard as I can. She's like, it doesn't look like you're trying.
I love that. Well, that's the whole principle of yin, right? So you'll have to say to her like, hey, listen, this is my yin. Because in yin, you're not trying to necessarily find like the edge of your flexibility. You're like a little bit before that. And so it's about finding the point where you can actually fully surrender. And sometimes that's going to be a little bit or a lot less for people, so that they can mentally relax into it and still find the yin-ness of that position. Yeah, okay. Do you think there's any hope for me, just as someone who can barely touch their knees, if I'm consistent? If you're consistent, yes. And okay. I think the thing is with mobility is like the barriers to action are not so much logistical, because it's so easy to just kind of like sit down and start. You don't really need much. You don't need any equipment, nothing, like maybe a mat or a cushion even for your knees, right? Yeah. But I think the hardest part of stretching is that other than the nice kind of high feeling that you get afterwards, where you do actually feel pretty amazing, you're not getting really an aesthetic change for a very long time. I mean, if ever, there's no aesthetic change. And that's really what drives a lot of our motivation for fitness anyway. And so when we finish a workout, we're like, yeah, okay, cool, but I'm getting closer to whatever kind of physical goal I have. Whereas with stretching, you're like, yeah, the dream bod, exactly. Whereas with stretching, you're just kind of like, oh, like I guess I kind of feel better. But then the next day you come to it and you're like, hang on a second, I feel just as stiff as I did yesterday, because it takes a lot of time, but it does work.
Okay, good, good, good. Well, I want to get into the dream board side of things at some point. But first, I want to start with you. I want to start with how you found yourself in the world of physical health. And feel free to go back as far as is relevant to tell the story.
Yeah. Well, probably it's as relevant as starting in a gymnastics program called Jumping Jelly Babies when I was about 3 years old. My parents put me into this. And so I got taken out of that Jumping Jelly Babies program, which was just kind of like a bit of fun for kids to like run around and see if they liked it. I got taken out of that. They said, she has potential. I got put into the elite program. And I started training very rigorously, very intensely.
How much is rigorous?
Towards the end of my gymnastics kind of era, I would say, it was over 20 hours a week of gymnastics training.
Whoa, that's like a job.
It's like a job, part-time job. Yeah, totally. And so I was turning up to school late and leaving school early in order to get to gymnastics to then train the whole night. So, it's funny, as we were talking earlier about being tired, and I think the attitude I have towards tiredness and just training, not so much training through tiredness, because I do think you have to respect it, but just a sort of like intensity of life. I think because in my early ages, I was being woken up by my parents, my poor parents having to drive me at, 5 a.m. to then be at the door at gymnastics at 6 a.m. to start training immediately until 8 a.m. And then you go to school and then finish school at 3 o'clock. So I could be at gymnastics from 4 and we'd train until 8. So it was like a very, very long day for me. And that's just been most of my life. And that is probably the foundation of movement for me. So it was very rigorous. At the same time, it was very focused on skill settings, if you will. I know that gymnastics and dance can have a really bad reputation for like body stuff. So it's, very focused on, is she thin enough? Is she lean enough? But I didn't have that experience. And it was very much focused around, how well can you perform, which, has its own trials for sure when you become too performance oriented. But it was definitely a really great place for me foundationally.
Okay, so that's where you sort of started, and then at some point you decided you didn't want to be an elite gymnast. What was the next step?
So it got to the point where, as I said, I was really not doing much school, and I wasn't having much of a life outside of gymnastics. So my dad turned to me and he said, do you want to continue down this path, or do you want to sort of have a life? And I chose life, which is surprising to me now because I did love gymnastics, but I think it was just getting to the point where it was everything. And my dad and my parents in general were concerned that I wasn't going to have any other sort of place in my life for anything else, and what kind of repercussions. As an adult, I can now understand that. As a child, I was sort of like, I don't really know any other way. But I felt like, I think life might be the right choice here.
You were feeling a pull to something beyond sport.
Yeah, beyond just gymnastics. But to this day, I still have trouble watching gymnastics, so I can't engage in it that much. I probably need to do some work around it, but I do
There's
find
a little
it hard
bit of
to
trauma
watch.
just sort of sitting there.
You're sitting there like that, sort of the fork in the road where I'm like, well, what would have happened if I had stayed? But I try not to watch the Olympics, which is so terrible of me. I need to get over that.
Because you're looking there and you're like, that could have been me.
Yeah, a little bit, and it's like I was going down that path. I was training at the Australian Institute of Sport, and I was too young for the Sydney 2000 Olympics, but it would have been that next 2004 that they would have been like, okay, let's put you into this program and train.
Wow.
And so there's that little sting for me, but it's very minor and it's fine. So it's silly. So I basically went into dance because floor was my best routine, best apparatus, and I had a natural ability for dance and just not even ability, but just I really loved it. I loved the expressive movement of it. I loved that I could sort of transduce, if you will, emotions that I had and put them into dance in some way. And at the time, my parents were going through a very messy divorce. So having an outlet like that was really beautiful, even though I didn't know that was what it was at the time, but it was an outlet for me. And
that sounds like the healthiest way to deal with a divorce I've ever heard. Just dance through it. It's quite incredible.
Well, I can't say that it was like a conscious choice, but it was definitely something that happened naturally. And so dance became a very big part of my life in order to kind of like heal some of the injuries that I'd sustained in gymnastics, which wasn't a lot, but some was starting to creep up in my body, I was told to kind of go into yoga. And I moved into yoga and I loved it. From first sun salutation, I truly, truly loved it. And it's obviously also in my heritage, but my mum had never sort of like pushed it onto me. So it was something that felt close and felt right. However, the physical practice of yoga was actually not helping what was going wrong with my body at the time and the pain that I was experiencing. So yoga was very much about really pushing that flexibility, or at least that was what I thought at the time. And so I thought, okay, the aim of yoga is to get in the splits, and that's where I'll find enlightenment, and that's where everything will just come together.
So
and
it was
it'll
very
be amazing.
goal-oriented.
It was very goal-oriented, yeah. It's, again, this theme of like this performance-oriented sort of approach.
Yeah.
So I just couldn't fix these injuries that I was experiencing in my body. And it wasn't until I came into contact with weight training that I was like, oh, hang on, there's something in this. At my first weight training session, all my pain that I would normally experience was just gone immediately. And so I started to put two and two together and realized that, okay, if I'm going to help myself, and also at this time I was already a yoga teacher, if I was going to help my clients, I would need to be understanding how to strength train the body. And this was sort of the, I guess, birthplace of the Vertue Method, which is a combination of strength work, flexibility work, and also mindfulness and meditation and psychology practices all in one.
Yeah, I actually have a question about that because, you know, it's this rounded, holistic fitness goal that you talk about. And I feel like I hear fitness experts advertise sort of two separate ideologies that I don't think can exist together. And the one is to be your healthiest self, you need to have this routine which balances strength, cardio, mobility. And the other is that the best routine for you is the routine you stick to. And so I feel like, you know, I want to subscribe to that first lifestyle where there's this rounded fitness goal, there's a bit of everything. But in my ideal world, I'd just be playing sport and running. Like I wouldn't go anywhere near a gym because I don't like the smell or the lighting or the men built like aircraft carriers grunting orgasmically every time they do a rep. And like the only reason I go to weight training is because I know it's good for me. Is it possible to overcome this aversion to the gym with like a psychological or mindful tool? Or should I just grit my teeth and get used to it? Or should I just stick to what I love?
I mean, you've already done the first step, which is like some kind of self-awareness towards understanding and admitting that like, yeah, you don't like it there. And then I think the next step is really sort of saying like, what's the cost of not going? The cost of not going might be that eventually you actually have trouble even engaging in the sport that you love. So even though I do like to tell people to do the thing that you love, but know that the stuff around it, even if you don't love it or like it, it's actually contributing in some way to the ongoing ability for you to continue that sport. So if you love to, what sport is it that you like to do?
Soccer and squash are my big ones.
You absolutely need to be doing your mobility practices around it. And you also need to be, to some degree, maintaining some kind of weight training practice. I think it's more like thinking of those things as not so much the goal. You don't need to become some crazy powerlifter or bodybuilder. It's just like, okay, what can I do to support this, that thing that I do love? And that's what I say to everyone about all of it. So a holistic approach, it's kind of like being a jack of all trades, but trying to also be a master of one. Yeah. And the thing that you tend to be the master at is the thing that you truly love. And then the jack of all trades is like around it to support your mastery.
So I think of it as, you know, I go, I'm here for injury prevention. I'm here to improve my performance. I'm here to do these things that help prop up the thing I actually care about.
Absolutely. Perfect.
Okay, good. That I feel better already. I'm not excited for the gym, but I'm not quite as terrified.
Yeah. And I mean, like you would know that like it's similar to maybe some people's meditation practice, right? Or like their journey into it. Rarely do people feel like excited to sit. Some people do, definitely, but particularly in the beginning of your journey, like no one is being like, oh man, I can't wait to like sit down and let all this stuff that I've been suppressing with my mobile phone and my job and everything to just rise to the surface, or I have to chase it, right? So no one's really stoked to do that. It's the same for the gym.
Well, that's interesting that you say it's the same for the gym, because my impression was that everyone loved it but me. And it's kind of like, it's a bit of a male thing as well. Like you kind of feel obligated. I don't know. I mean, in Sydney at least. Yeah, to like it. And like my friends will just text me. They're like, hey, you want to go do a workout? I was like, yeah, I guess. Why is this an activity why can't we go for brunch?
Yes. Well, I mean, brunch is great too. Well, here's an interesting, I definitely feel this for both men and women actually. And I've seen this in my clients is that, and as working as a PT, definitely other PTs will be able to attest to this, is you have this really interesting relationship with your clients because you're not their therapist. And we all have a sometimes awkward relationship with our therapist, particularly in the beginning where you sort of feel like, oh, I don't really want to tell them something. Or, you start to develop a relationship where it's hard to, that sometimes there are things you just don't want to tell your therapist actually, because you still feel shame. And so it's the therapist's job to work through that therapeutic relationship to help you unpack that and not feel ashamed in front of them. PTs, on the other hand, we have access to people's inner secrets, inner workings, because we've been there next to them in two ways. One, as just a friend that's not judging, like we're just sort of standing there and looking at their form and checking through things. But what's interesting and what happens when you're training is that stuff starts to come up, similar to meditation. When you're working out, it's like this, this sort of like you have this, I don't know, you kind of like stuff comes up and you drop it off at the gym. And that's what a lot of those I see those bodybuilders and men are doing, is that things are coming up for them and they can kind of feel like they're getting it out. Now, if they don't have a PT standing there, they're probably not talking about it, but maybe they're sort of like ruminating through it in a way. And what I've noticed with my clients is that they'll tell me their deepest, darkest secrets when they're training. And then later I'll get a text message that's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I told you that. Oh, could you make sure that that's a secret? And of course, like confidentiality still applies in the PT relationship, but it's an interesting thing that happens. So I do think that sometimes for people, there's more going on than just this. In fact, sorry, not sometimes, all the time, there's more going on for people. But some people find that the gym is a nicer way for them to allow those things to come up than they feel if they're sitting at brunch and talking to you. Yeah.
Wow. So it's kind of the intimacy and the endorphins mixed together can sort of outweigh avocado toast in terms of like how deep you can get.
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting.
100%.
Interesting. Okay.
And maybe those friends are reaching out to you because they want to feel like they're engaging in something masculine. And yet at the same time, it makes it, because they're engaging in something masculine, it makes it easier for them to tell you things that maybe they feel ashamed about.
I love that read, because you've got this masculine macho sort of shell around what's going to be, some very personal, deep. Yeah,
but that was a real, I am woman-splaining, so.
No, well, that's why you're on the show. You're on the show to woman-splain. We want to hear from you. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about Buddhism as well, because you're a Buddhist. And did you grow up Buddhist or did you find Buddhism?
It's so funny. I knew that you were going to ask this question, and I was like, I came to Buddhism in such a romance is not romance is the right word, but it's not the right word in the way that I think about it. It wasn't maybe it was a little bit synchronistic, but basically I had started seeing a guy when I think he was like my second boyfriend ever. And he had met someone in the gym who was teaching martial arts and massaging and teaching people about the body. And it was traditional Chinese martial arts. So it was more like Tai Chi focused, but it was also, the massage was Tui Na, which is Chinese massage. And he started learning from him. And he started learning from him all through the weekends. And I had a full-time job at this time. He was a PT full-time. And I just felt like I never saw him. So I was like, well, how can I start to see you? And so the rule was that if you learned martial arts, that you also had to learn how to heal people. You had to learn Tui Na as well. So I started turning up to these Saturday sessions, which were, martial arts in the park, Tai Chi in the park. And then we would learn massage on Sundays. And on Sundays, we'd also do massage, an hour of massage, and then an hour of Buddhism. And I went to my first class, and it was all psychology. It was all human psychology. And I was in. I was truly in. I was like, this is what I have been looking for. And I had been wanting to study psychology for such a long time, and I am now, but it was just, it really had me immediately. So from there, I started to get really deeply into it, and then I have been studying it my whole life. So I came to it through romance, and I stayed because I fell in love with Buddhism. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's a great story. I mean, I think like a lot of people are attracted to this sort of deep intellectualism that's layered throughout the religion. Like it is a lot more than just the spiritual practice. And it also is very possible to study it in a secular way.
Yes. Well, it was really powerful because I was 19 years old when I came to it. So it's like, and most of us were in our 20s. And so actually it was a really powerful influence on my 20s and 30s that I think has now played a huge part in just how I live. Well, it definitely has. It's not even a question. It has definitely played a huge part in how I live my life and how it's sort of given my behavior and my emotions and just the direction of my life a lot more organization, because you can kind of use Buddhism and what you're taught through Buddhism to filter through your problems. And it's very universal. So it doesn't matter which problem, it always applies to many of the things that you're going through. So yeah, it's been very powerful for me.
That's true. And does it relate to physical health in a particular way? I mean, does it fit into this? I think something you talk about is the biopsychosocial picture.
Yes, it does. I mean, the biopsychosocial model came from basically a researcher that was like, hey guys, it's more than just the body thing. You know, like ailments are more than just the body. We need to pay attention to what stress is being caused by, you know, someone's psychology and their social setting and their environment. I mean, Buddhism categorically has been talking about that for a very, very long time. There's different systems in Buddhism. So I follow Mahayana Buddhism, which is very much about developing like your characteristics in a certain way. So it talks a lot about the Bodhisattva system or Bodhisattva, depending on how you pronounce it. And as we said, all the spiritual and let's say quote unquote religious parts of it aside, even though that is not what drew me, and that's not sort of, I think it's a misconception, even though there is a lot of that and there's a lot of that around Buddhism as well. I think one of the reasons I really love Mahayana Buddhism is because of how deeply it talks about and teaches consciousness and the experience of consciousness in general. Really with Buddhism, there's different types, and there is sort of like the monk system that many have seen. And this system that I follow is a different system altogether as well. But both of them, I think you could say, is about trying to explore this idea of taking care of the body, but not over-identifying with it. And that's very difficult in the fitness space because so much of, and we touched on it a little bit, so much of what motivates people, and definitely people in the fitness industry, and myself included, like I have to constantly check myself on this, is this aesthetic drive. Is this like, you know, I want to look good in a bikini, or I want to lose some weight for my wedding. You know, why is that? And then over time, what can happen is you can get too connected to the physical expression of your body and over-identify with the body in general. And Buddhism moves away from this. But I think the biggest misconception is that Buddhism is about kind of completely renouncing any kind of care for your body. And that's just not the case. I mean, that's a massive misconception, actually. It really is about knowing that your human body is the vessel through which you can come to understand many of the amazing aspects of life. So you're better off taking care of it.
Yeah. I mean, like if you're healthy, you can experience more, right?
Yes.
But at the same time, I love what you said about over-identifying. Like you're sort of freeing yourself from yourself a lot in Buddhism, but you're also freeing yourself from, you know, the vessel that yourself or your illusion of self resides in.
Yes, exactly that.
Okay, so when we talk about these ideal bodies, I mean, I think something that's made it difficult now is social media. And again, it's something that you've spoken about. How can, let's say, the non-Buddhists among us be bombarded by the most beautiful bodies all day, every day on social media and maintain any degree of self-esteem?
That's a great question. That's a great question. And I don't think there's one single answer. First and foremost, I like to say that, you know, comparison is the thief of joy, as many of us do. I can't remember whose quote that is, but I think the problem with that quote is that it also goes against human nature, because so much of how we learn is through mirroring, is through observation. And so if we're suggesting that the only way to kind of like exist in this world is to completely like shut ourselves off and just focus on us, then we're kind of ignoring the fact that there is this interdependency that exists within like me looking at this person and sort of weighing myself up. And then we sort of explore and engage with the world in that interdependent way. And it's a really important aspect of our life. So I think that it's a constant process. If you see someone else's body online, you have to try to do the kind of cognitive work to remember that you are living in a different circumstance to that person. And so maybe that person has more time than you. Maybe that person has less time than you, but they see it, they value it in a different way to you. Perhaps it's there, as I said, like many bodybuilders that are out there, they have mental stuff that they're working through, and the gym has become that place for them. As I said, with my own stuff, gymnastics was that place for me to release some of the angst that I was experiencing at home. And so you just never know. And so if you're really pretty happy, then sometimes you have to find a different form of motivation. So I think it's just remembering that we're all very much on different paths, very, very much. Yes, there is this ever-existing beauty standard. Something I say to my clients is like, just see it as a game. Like just play the game and engage in the game, but always know that it is just a game. It is not something that you need to allow yourself to get upset over. And if you do get upset, which is natural, it's like just kind of check yourself and remember, you're like, you're just playing. We're just playing this game.
You're playing the game for the joy of the journey of playing the game. You don't have to win it, essentially.
Exactly.
Yeah. People don't always think about the fact that some of the people they're looking at are doing fitness as their job. You know, you might be working 60-hour weeks, in private equity, and you're comparing yourself to someone who's a professional fitness influencer. People are doing different stuff with their time, you know?
Absolutely. And values is really important. And I don't mean that in a like, oh, you clearly don't value it enough. But it's like, maybe you don't value it in a way that they value it. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because sometimes people's values are actually pulling them off the path of health at times.
Yes. Okay.
Even if it is fitness, even if it is in fitness.
Okay, so let's look at the other side about when we don't take it seriously enough. So say I'm not feeling 100%, I had a bad sleep or whatever. Should I be comfortable with letting myself quit my session 10 minutes in to go watch a movie? Or like, I have this succubus whispering in my ear saying like, you've had enough, today is not the day, give up. Is that self-talk okay? And is your self-talk different when you're feeling a lot of pain? And I'm talking about sort of tiredness, not like an injury. I'm talking about, the pain of doing something you don't want to do.
This is where a program or some kind of plan helps, because what it enables us to do is kind of basically just stick to the plan, even if that kind of noise is there. And that noise will always be there, right? And that's something that is definitely really hard about meditation, is the fact that when you're doing it, there's not always a plan. Like you can have a timer and the timer can be there, but ultimately like if you don't have any plan, things can go a little haywire, and you do feel that voice comes up a little more. And so that's one thing in meditation, but it's definitely a big thing. And you can mitigate it in the gym by having a plan and just saying, okay, I've got this program in front of me, and I'm just going to finish it, even if I have to drop the weight a little bit. So like I'm going to lower the weight so the intensity is not so high, but I'm just going to work on adherence. And so something that I say to people, because they're all at different levels, an advanced trainer or someone who's been training for a very long time will be very familiar with that voice and knows what to do with it, has protocols for that. When you're just starting out, and particularly when you're just starting on something new, you have nothing to sort of relate it to. So you just trust it. And it often prevents you from kind of going further. So if you have a plan, I always get my clients to spend the first 12 weeks of any program just focusing on adherence, not trying to focus on goals or outcomes or any of these things, even though those will happen. But it's more like, I want your radio station, internal radio station, to just be hyper focused on adherence. It's just like, I'm going to get through each of these exercises, then I'm going to leave the gym.
So it's not like if you don't have progressive overload, it's a waste of time.
Yeah, so progressive overload is a funny one because it's very important. So there's no denying that. But a lot of people think that it has to be really aggressive each time, so that it has to be like some huge like change every time you set up at the bar. But as you get better and better with training, actually that progressive overload gets smaller and smaller because it becomes harder and harder to make changes, particularly obviously at the athlete level, you're making tiny tweaks. But when you start out, progressive overload, like you definitely want to make use of it because there's something known as beginner gains. And basically it's when your body kind of kicks into gear and it's like you just get all these amazing adaptations. So you can actually really jump up a lot of weights when you start. And it's really motivating. It's kind of like this little gift from the universe, if you will, that's like, you go get it. So it's really nice. So progressive overload is really important. However, I think when I'm working with someone who really has a strong succubus, if you will, then I would actually focus on the psychology aspect of these things more so, because there's something in health behavior psychology or health psychology called self-efficacy. I mean, we've all heard of that word, but self-efficacy is a really interesting aspect in the research because it basically determines whether you will or will not even engage in an exercise or a health behavior. So for anyone that's like, what's self-efficacy? It's basically just the belief that you can do something or get something done, a belief in yourself. It's kind of like self-confidence. The problem is that when we first come to a new fitness thing or a new sport or anything new, we have very little self-efficacy, right? Because we've never done it. We have no experience with it. Or if we come back to it after a long hiatus, maybe what we have is low self-efficacy because we're like, well, it's been so long. We have all these excuses and these reasons that we can use to keep fueling that low self-efficacy. So you need to build up that bank, because that's the only thing that's going to help you to keep engaging in the behavior. And this is according to the research, but it's also quite logical. So we may not have even needed research for that. But basically, if you don't continue to just show up, it's very hard for you to feel confident in yourself and your abilities. And that then prevents you from actually continuing and then achieving that consistency in those goals. So similar for you with your love-hate of weight training, right? Or mobility even. You're sort of like, you know, it's that thing of like, well, I'm not very good at it, so I won't do it. But if you don't do it, you won't get good at it.
It makes perfect sense. You know what? I'm going to ask a question as a football fanatic that
go for it.
is a little naughty, but I do have to ask one David Beckam question.
Yes, go for it.
When you were training with Beckham, was there anything about his mindset or attitude that you think contributed to his ability to compete at an elite level? Did he have some mental X factor?
That's a great question. That's probably the best question I've ever been asked about training with him. That is a great one.
Oh, thank God.
Yes and no. So he's very focused. So that was definitely, you know, when he showed up, he was very focused about training. He was very focused about each position. He wanted to understand like what each position was going to do, how it was going to like impact him, not in a sort of skeptical way, but a sort of like a very curious way.
Were these yoga positions or Pilates positions?
Yoga. Yeah. And because after the first session, he felt immediate change. I remember the first text I got from him was like, wow, my back feels incredible. And he'd been suffering back pain right before that. And I think that his focus and curiosity was probably something that I definitely see it in other people, which is why I sort of say yes and no, because it's like, it's definitely within all of us, actually. We all have that capacity. But I think that definitely gave him a little bit of an edge. Whereas with other clients I've had before, I've had to kind of like coax their interest a little bit more. I'm sort of offering like facts and interesting points about certain postures and why this is helpful. And I sort of, you know, I'll see people nod and kind of go like, in the early days. And then over time, they're like very hungry for it. But something that I tend to say a lot is like education. I think education is the best motivation, because when we know why we're doing something, we're much more likely to do it. And that does play in with some of the values around health psychology and the health psychology research that we have. So I think getting a better understanding of why we're doing something is beneficial. And I definitely saw that curiosity in David when we were training.
Does does that kind of focus have a dark side? Like, can it ever be, viewed as frustration when you're not quite getting it the way you think you should be? Like, is it part of a perfectionism or is it a separate thing?
Look, that would be like asking a fish what water is, to ask me about that, because I definitely am constantly ailed with managing perfectionism and managing that voice. So it's possible that I have in many ways missed that point. And I do tend to over-intellectualize something. So, and meditation is a classic example. Mahayana Buddhism is a classic example. Like, even on my own journey of doing these things, I have come to get really into the sutras and really into it's so fun to just sort of like hypothesize about this, or not even hypothesize, but just like learn all the things. But it's like actually the true learning occurs in the action and the doing and the process of failing and not failing, all those things. And so I think that, yes, there is a dark side to the educational aspect of things, because you can just, there's endless education, and there's also endless conflicting education as well, depending on the way that you look at it. So I think there is a dark side, and as you say, perfectionism for sure, because you can start to move more towards trying to be perfect in your execution of something, because you know all the reasons why this is important, and you forget to actually just fall in love with the act or the sensation or the sort of more somatic side of things rather than the intellectual side of things. So yes, definitely. There is a dark side for sure.
Great response. Final question. Other than working on your perfectionism, what are you doing right now to improve your well-being, your mental well-being, physical well-being? What are you working on?
Yeah, it's actually, I feel like I'm climbing my way out of the postpartum hole. And I don't mean that in a postpartum depression sense, but I think that maybe all mothers might be able to relate to this in some ways, that even if you don't necessarily have postpartum depression, it's such a huge shift in your life. And also we know with matrescence, which is, just basically this kind of like second adolescence that you go through when you become a mother.
Yeah.
So many brain changes, so much changing about yourself. I think I'm starting to, as I move, my daughter has just turned 10 months, and so she's coming to that first year, and I feel like I'm starting to reconnect to not an old self, because I do feel like she's quite gone and probably never to return, in the same way that when you're a teenager, you don't feel like you're ever going to be the same kid that you were, and you aren't. There's little glimpses of you in there, but it's very, very small. I think that I am just finding myself again, just not an old self, just a new self. I guess I'm getting to know myself a little bit more. So, things like, reconnecting to my meditation practice in the morning, even though Ayana, my daughter, is next to me and kind of playing around. And sometimes when I sort of like move into some kind of stretch or even have my eyes closed or I'm chanting in some way, like I still feel her like pulling at me, being curious, but I sort of integrate it now into the whole practice. So I think it's just finding myself and these practices that have benefited me so much with her. In my life, and with this new kind of, oh God, I haven't heard this word in a long time, but the new normal, as we remember using that word all the time with COVID. But yes, that's sort of what it feels like.
Shona, thank you so much for being so open and being so free and informative. I've learned an absolute ton. And where can other people learn about you and your work?
I think just my website, so shonavertue.com. And then obviously on Instagram, social media, I'm there, Shona_Vertue. Vertue is my real name. It's Vertue. I think people think that I have a stage name because of my thing, but it is, I'll show you my birth certificate.
You were born with a stage name.
I was born with a stage name. What can I say?
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. If you enjoyed this conversation, please consider leaving a review or a rating. It does so much to help people find the show. This is the Overexamined Life. Have a wonderful weekend. We'll be back on Monday. Hope to see you then.